I'm Victoria Cobb, president of the Family Foundation. Thrilled to have everyone here again for another week of VIP chats. We've heard from some awesome legislators, Senator Newman and Delegate Byron, and the list just goes on, Delegate LaRock. We thought we'd shift gears a little bit, and we realized at the Family Foundation, because we're one of them, that there are a lot of policy minds that impact politics, and that we want to kind of give you an opportunity to get a little bit behind some of the issues, not just sort of with the legislators and how they play out, but actually what's the thinking when we get into these battles about certain issues. So today we are really excited about what's coming up, and we'll get there in just a minute. I'm going to make just a few remarks on what's going on sort of in our world this week at the Family Foundation. Most specifically, I would say the Family Foundation is keeping a very careful eye on this issue of Reopen America. When is Virginia going to reopen? And most specifically, we're focused on the churches and what is the fundamental right to worship and how is that being impeded? Is it an appropriate use of government control, or is it actually overreach? And so we've been working with churches to provide them various opportunities that they've been really taking advantage of. Some have written letters to the governor simply saying, we believe this is our fundamental right, and so therefore we are planning to open this coming Sunday, and here's how the precautions we're going to take, which is sort of a come get me if you're really that serious about it, but we think we stand on the Constitution. Some churches have put a letter together and been working with the governor's office, basically saying, we need you to reopen this earlier, and here's what we're planning to do when you give us permission, but please give us permission now, sooner rather than later. So there's been that approach. There's also a litigation approach. Some of you probably have seen on Fox News, and some other places have shown it. CBN, I believe, covered it. Church out in Chincoteague actually got a violation of the order for a meeting, and we're thrilled to see that as that progresses, the U.S. Justice Department has actually jumped in defense of this church. We hope that's sufficient for our governor and our elected officials to understand that the weight of the U.S. government is going to stand behind these churches. So we hope that just simply is enough for them to ease up. Certainly, we believe that there is an essentialness about being able to meet, that we are called, certainly in the Christian faith, we're called to fellowship together, to be a body together. And there is something, although it is not about the building, it is about the meeting together, the idea of Eucharist or communion, depending on your, sort of your practice specifically. But those are things that we believe are essential, and we believe they're fundamental to our Constitution. So long story short, we've been just kind of helping churches walk the path they see fit to walk in this moment. And so we're pleased to be a part of that. The other piece that I've been telling you about each week, if you've been joining us ever so often during this season, is that we are also gearing up and helping defend in court a pro-life individual who got cited out in Virginia Beach for having a mobile ultrasound unit outside of an abortion center. Again, if you can have an abortion, if that's an essential service, that by law requires an ultrasound. Certainly the pro-life folks can be out there socially distant, but offering an ultrasound because it's an essential service relative to a woman's decision. We're devastated that essentialness is going to go away July 1 with the repeal of all the abortion standards that we had put in place over the last 20 years. But for today, it is certainly essential and certainly should be the right of a pro-life group. So that court date is in June, but we're gearing up already for the defense of the pro-life community. And certainly we want to send the signal to others who are out there outside of clinics that we've got your back. We will be there to help you defend your right to help women make a better decision. We know that there are around the country some stats starting to show up that say abortion is on the rise during this pandemic, that unfortunately the crisis, and we know this typically just looking at economic trends, when the economy struggles, women don't get the support they need in the communities around them with either their loved one or the father of this child or their family. And what we find is they panic about the financial picture. And unfortunately, without pro-lifers helping them make good decisions, without pregnancy resource centers being able to be open and vibrant, they often make the wrong decision. And so we're also just trying to applaud our pregnancy centers that are staying open, providing needed services. If you are connected to one of those right now, they probably need your help with goods for women who are trying to prepare for pregnancy. They need your help with funding. So we want to be kind of standing locked arm with them as well in this moment. So those are the kind of things that we've been up to. Certainly there have been various rallies at the Capitol on Reopen America and so forth that people feel really passionate about participating in. So that's another kind of component that's going on. It really is. I was on a national call yesterday. It is a groundswell movement across the country right now where people are saying we've got to balance the risk of this pandemic with the economic collapse that will have lives at stake as well. And so anyway, all that to say, as you know, in Virginia, our governor locked us down to June 10th. He's easing up a few things on the 14th. So thankfully, at least elective surgeries can go forward. That's really important too. A lot of the hospitals that are losing untold dollars, furloughed jobs, and also a lot of these outpatient post-surgery things like physical therapy and all those kind of tangential services that connect to that. So slowly but surely, we're hoping that Virginia gets back on track in this economy. So that's just a little piece of what the Family Foundation's got going on. One more note I want to mention, if your pastor is not already queued in tomorrow, same time, same place, so to speak, different link, a different registration, but we're having a specific pastors webinar just to tell pastors about the new laws that are going to be in effect July 1 that deeply impact churches. These are the new non-discrimination laws. They basically allow folks to immediately start claiming discrimination if you and your church hire or fire based on the tenets of your faith, or if you do not allow your sanctuary to be used for a same-sex marriage, or the list goes on and on and on. And so we're going to talk to pastors tomorrow at lunchtime through this same means about how the Family Foundation intends to go after this legally, what we can do to prepare. So if your pastor doesn't know about that, in our email alerts, you should have gotten something about that. And I would definitely recommend passing the word. For this time, this one is just for pastors. Certainly we'll continue to keep everyone else informed, but we want this to be a great Q&A for folks that are impacted very directly. With that, I'm excited to move on to our speaker for today. Our speaker today is Michael Maibach. He has been a friend of the Family Foundation for many years, and we're excited to bring him on. Todd Gackey, our Director of Government Relations, is going to have a Q&A with him and let him present a little bit about the Electoral College and why the compact that we saw during this General Assembly session that is being pushed by liberals, that the Family Foundation helped, along with Michael's organization, Save the States, we helped try to block that from being successful. But he'll tell you all about it. So with that, I'm gonna just shut down and let Todd and Michael take over. Thanks so much. Great to have you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Victoria. As you can tell, there's a lot going on here at the Family Foundation. Michael, it's great to have you with us, and it's a pleasure. Just want to find out, first of all, how are you doing? How are you enjoying this mandated stay-at-home policy?
Time to open up America again, obviously, and delighted to be with you, and thanks for asking me to discuss this with your viewers today.
Great. Just for everyone that's on the webinar, can you just give a little bit about your background, professional education, just so people can get a feel for where you've been and where you're coming from?
Okay, well, I grew up in Peoria, Illinois. It's my hometown. After graduate school, Caterpillar Tractor, which is headquartered in Peoria, moved me to California. I was hired later by the four founders of the Intel Corporation back 1983, when nobody had a PC, everybody had typewriters at Intel. They invented the microprocessors, you know, in 1971. So I spent 18 years working for the founders of Intel. I was their vice president of global government affairs, and I grew that department around the world. Then when the founders all left the company, I became president of the European American Business Council for 10 years. And now I'm serving on nonprofit boards and working for Save Our States, which is a small organization dedicated to defending the Electoral College.
Great. Well, as you probably know, during session here in Virginia, we had this battle over the national popular vote compact. It did not pass. However, it was continued to 2021, and there's been a promise to maybe even hold a hearing in the fall on this issue. I think those are on the webinar are really interested in this topic. It was one of our most followed issues during session, with a lot of things that we were encountering. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hand it over to you. I know you have a presentation on the MPV and also any information and how that relates to Electoral College. I'm going to hand it over to you, and then I'll come back on and ask some questions.
Okay, Todd, thanks very much, and hello to everyone that's called in. The Constitution has been a problem for the left for as long as we've had a Constitution, because the Constitution is really a protection of our liberty. When I talk about this topic, I like to ask people, especially young people, do you believe in minority rights? Because the founders really were very concerned about minority rights and keeping our liberties, not just majority rule. Matter of fact, they didn't set out to create majority rule, but rather a republic. And that is to keep us free with all kinds of checks and balances and federalism. So I think you can see some slides. Are these visible now? Yeah. Okay. So when actually Al Gore barely lost to George W. Bush by the recount in Florida, some wealthy people in California created a national popular vote campaign. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. 15 states have now signed on. And their main message is it's undemocratic to have a president elected by less than the popular vote. And that's happened 4 times in our history, twice in the last century, and then Bush v. Gore, and then Clinton v. Trump. So let's talk a little bit about the undemocratic parts of our current system. We have a presidential veto of a congressional act. That could be said to be undemocratic. And of course, the states in the US Senate have a role in that. We are a nation of states. If you don't understand that, you really don't understand our Constitution in its fullness. Congress declares war. The states are involved with that as well. Every state has 2 US senators. Why does California, with 38 million people, in Delaware, have 2 US senators? It's because we had 13 states that really created the Constitution, and the Connecticut Compromise, which was in the middle of the Constitutional Convention, was really between Roger Sherman from a small state, Connecticut, and James Madison from the largest state. Remember, in 1787, Virginia had the largest population of any of the 13 states, 750,000. Georgia had 75,000, 1/10 the population. Everyone else was in between. So to understand the Constitution is understand the role of the states. The Supreme Court has judicial review, and of course, the president appoints, but the Senate, the states, approve or confirm members of the Supreme Court, not the House of Representatives. The House impeaches, but the Senate, as we just were reminded, tries. The president negotiates, but only the Senate, the states, confirm treaties. It takes 38 states, not just a majority, but 38 states to amend the Constitution. Again, the founders and the 13 states wanted to make sure the smaller states were protected. And the president nominates, and the Senate confirms federal judges, not the House of Representatives. It's not a popular vote thing in that sense, but it's part of federalism. And the Electoral College, again, is about states. What are the benefits of the Electoral College? We've been electing presidents since 1789 using this system. It's served us very well. Look what's happened in Israel, for example. Since last September's 19th vote, they're still trying to figure out who the prime minister is, because they have 10 parties in their parliament, and none has more than 30-some votes out of 120. It's created a robust and stable 2-party system. We take this for granted, but our 2-party system only exists because we have the Electoral College, and therefore to be a serious presidential candidate, you have to get a lot of states lined up, and therefore 2 parties are the only way to become president in our system, at least to date. It demands presidential candidates attract nationwide support, which brings moderation, hopefully, to our candidates. It balances a large and small state interests. It balances urban and rural life. I mean, I'm from Illinois, where 75% of the land in Illinois is farmland, and they're feeding all those folks, those millions of people in Chicago. Well, if Chicago is going to run everything, the nice people that feed them may say, you know, go find your food somewhere else. Iowa is the second largest food producing state, and they're not a very big population. And it secures a winner. Abraham Lincoln only won 39.7% of the vote on the run up to the Civil War in 1860. So 40% of the people didn't vote for him. That's because 6 people were running, but he got the Electoral College majority, and therefore we actually had a president during the Civil War as opposed to a crisis in the House of Representatives. So for all those undemocratic features in the Constitution, to sustain our compound republic, as Madison called it in Federalist 51, checks and balances, tyranny of the majority must be sustained. The Electoral College must be sustained. Otherwise, we will have tyranny of the majority. So the popular vote people feel very differently about this. They think that the people shall rule, we're one country, etc. I like to ask students, how many countries are in the European Union? And they'll say 28. Of course, the UK is leaving. And then I'll ask them, how many of the 28 elect their president, head of government, by a popular vote? Of the 28 in Europe, only 2 elect by popular vote, Cyprus and France. All the rest choose their head of government by the parliament. And the founders rejected that, of course, and they took votes on that in the Constitutional Convention. They didn't want legislative tyranny. They wanted an independent executive. Here's what the MBV Compact does. It's states commit to appoint presidential electors to vote in accordance with the results of the national vote, no matter how their own state voters wish. Believe it or not, this is quite an insult to these elected representatives in Richmond and other state capitals are voting for this. NPV takes effect once the compact states' electoral votes total 270, which it takes to have the presidency. And today, 15 states and DC have voted to do this, and their governors have signed this, and that's 196 electoral votes. So they're only 74 electoral votes away from having a constitutional crisis on our hands. It says that it creates a direct popular election, even though our 50 states have wildly different voter laws and practices. Half of our states require showing voter ID and half don't. Half of our states give illegal immigrants driver's license, IDs, if you will, and on and on. Some states have mail-in voting, some don't. Some allow early voting, some don't. This system would lead to a federal government takeover of the elections. Right now, we have 50 states that run our elections and all the 3,400 counties. And it attempts to circumvent the Constitution in doing all of this, of course. This is our population if we had a national popular vote. 9 states have half of the votes in this country. 9 states. These are the 10 largest cities today. As you can see, they're along our borders. 38 states have fewer people than the city of New York. 38 states. Nassau County on Long Island has more people in that one county than 10 of our states. 41 states have fewer people than Los Angeles County. 41 states. And one of those is California. So what are the pitfalls of the NPV? The cities will rule. This will be New York, Chicago, Miami, Houston, LA, San Francisco. A few cities will decide every president. There'll be huge, deep national alienation and talks of succession because the cities will be telling everybody how they're going to run this country. And of course, we'll have federal bailouts of all the blue states that have all these debts, that have these large cities. We'll have state vote total boycotts. States will say, we're not going to release on election night here in Vermont or New Hampshire the election totals. We'll wait until the day before the electors meet in the state capitol and announce, so no one will know what the national vote count. There's already legislation pending in states to do that. Federal election officials will then probably want to control the voting system of our counties. We'll have huge fraud incentives because if there's 1 million illegals that vote in California, California just has 57 electoral votes. But if those count throughout the nation, every state will have fraud incentives for elections. Endless recounts. If you think Florida was bad in 2000, just wait until everybody wants to have a recount because the national total. This is an impossibility with 300 some million people. France has 70 million people, and just think what a recount would be there. The two-party system would collapse. We'd have many, many parties. And just think, how do you elect a Speaker of the House if you've got 12 parties? Just think about that problem, for example. And there's constitutional issues. Article 1 says states can't have compacts unless they get the approval of Congress. So that hasn't happened. Article 2 says we have an electoral college system right now. The Supreme Court would have to decide if you can circumvent it. Article 4 says we guarantee a Republican form of government. What is Republican about Virginians voting, let's say, for one presidential candidate, but the popular vote goes for the other, and the Virginia government says, we don't care what our states have, the voters of our states have done. We want our electors to do something else. That's not a Republican form of government. And then, of course, the amendment process hasn't been followed. A few last comments on this, and we'll go to questions. Every president since 1980, and you could go back farther, have won the majority of the states. And because we are a nation of states. Now, there have been World Series like the 2002, where in the 7 games, the loser of the World Series had more runs, but not more games. And just like we have more states, if you will, when the winner is declared, more states and more electoral college votes. It's a combination, obviously, of population and states. Now, here are the 15 states that have already passed the NPV. In our House of Delegates here in Virginia, 51 to 46, it was passed on the 20th of February. It stalled in the Senate because there's some senators in both parties, a lot of senators in both parties that have concerns about what this says to about democracy in this country, our political system, etc. But this fall, the Privileges and Elections Committee of the Senate will meet again and take up this issue. So between now and the fall, we have to be vigilant. These are the target states this year and next for the NPV. It includes Virginia, North Carolina. You can see Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, etc. We're more concerned about Nevada. And in Nevada, the Democratic legislature passed it, but the Democratic governor vetoed it. And by the way, of the 15 states that have passed this, every one has had a one party that controlled the House, the Senate, and the governor. It's all been one Democratic Party vote. There's been no mixed vote there thus far. And of course, in Virginia, we have one party rule. Now, this is a quote from Montesquieu that Hamilton has in Federalist 9. Mankind would have been obliged to live constantly under the government of a single person had they not contrived a constitution that all the internal advantages of a republic together with external, and that's a federation. Well, he goes on to talk about the need for states. So I think there I'll just stop and we'll take questions. We have the world's oldest constitution, most successful, as Washington wrote to Lafayette at the end of the Constitutional Convention. It is the best constitution that can be obtained by this epoch or this time in history. Madison wrote in Federalist 37, I perceived a finger of the almighty hand at work in Philadelphia. it's the world's first and oldest constitution, and is to be defended. So with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Great. Well, we really do appreciate that overview. I wanted to remind those that are on this webinar that if you go to your questions box, there is a feature where you can type in the question. I'm sorry I failed to mention that a little sooner, but I have a few questions. But if there are any participants in the webinar, just go to your questions feature and you can type it in and we will see it, and then we can ask Michael that whatever question it is that you might have. There's a lot here that we can really kind of get into, because it's really it is a threat to the Electoral College. It's a threat to the process by which we elect our presidents. Can you just give us just maybe a very brief kind of explanation of why is this direct democracy so dangerous? Why, and that may kind of get into why the founders chose Electoral College process.
Right.
I want to save some time, but maybe you can kind of touch on that just to kind of get us going.
Okay, very good. Well, as I have on this slide, the founders studied history. They believed, as Churchill once said, the further you can see backward, the further you can see forward, because human nature doesn't change over time, and therefore mistakes that have been made in the past can be learned from. They looked at the Athenian Democracy, which was really the first democracy that we know of any substance, and it fell apart. Plato wrote in Plato's Republic, tyranny naturally arises out of democracy. Whenever you have the majority rule, who protects the minority rights? The founders were concerned about that. They looked at Rome. Rome was a republic for a long time, for 500 years, and then it became an empire, and their democratic system fell apart. And they tried to learn from Cicero and others the problems with Rome. In Federalist 9, Hamilton writes, "It is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the distractions with which they were continually agitated, and at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy." So we wanted to have ordered liberty. When the Declaration was written by Jefferson, he wrote that we're endowed by our Creator with our rights, but government is instituted to secure those rights. So the founders were not about majority rule. They were about how do we secure rights for everybody? Religious freedom, freedom of speech, even if you're the only person that believes something, how do we protect those rights? And that's what the founders tried to do with checks and balances. So they read Montesquieu. He wrote a book called The Spirits of the Laws in 1748. He's a Frenchman who spent 20 years studying why democracies, whether it's in Venice or elsewhere, why have they failed? And he said, because of tyranny. You have to have separation of powers, protect the minority from the majority, and checks and balances. This is Mr. Checks and Balances here. He was the one that gave the founders the ideas for having the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the presidency.
Yeah, I think that is a great response, and it highlights the significance of this issue of the National Popular Vote Compact and the threat that it is, especially here in Virginia. Tell me what needs to be done to prevent this from passing in the Senate next, in the fall in the committee. What's the messaging that we need to send to our legislators on this?
Well, the messaging is that the republic is at stake. We have a system that's worked since 1789 because it enhances moderation. It has engendered a two-party system. We have 300 and who knows, people don't seem to know because of recent events, I guess you would say, 300 and maybe 20 million people. And to have a government that goes by the mob, if you will, popular rule, a popular vote, rather than by the electoral votes of every state, really leaves us to the vibrations that that was talked about here, the rapid succession of revolutions, the perpetual vibrations between tyranny and anarchy. We've seen how the checks and balances have served this past year. We had a House of Representatives in one party and a White House in the other. And the House did impeach the president because they're just have been upset for a long time with the results of the 2016 election. But the states in the Senate had to actually make that decision. Are we going to convict the president of these things? And the case was not made successfully because the Senate, the states, if you will, said, we have to cool these passions and not upset an election. But just think if we didn't have the Senate, if we just had a parliament that could overthrow an election by a majority vote, you would have every Congress would be trying to overthrow any president that wasn't of the same party.
Yeah, I think that just, it goes to show what we're really battling against here in Virginia. I want to speak just briefly about maybe some of the specifics of what the pitfalls of this will be. And you had mentioned in there about recounts. What kind of impact would the MPV have on any future recounts in future years if there were to be one? What's going to happen? What would that look like?
We've never had such a problem before. In other words, a national demand for recounts. But I assume we're going to have a lot of that this year. Our politics are quite broken, as you know. If we have a close election, and we probably will, there'll be lots of contests by lawyers in both parties in many of the states. If you think about an ocean liner, and if you watch the movie Titanic, you know that the problem in Titanic was that they didn't have the construction of the ocean liner, so they had these compartments that one didn't overflow to the next and the next and cause it to sink. One of the nice things about the 50-state system that we have is even if we have corruption or voter fraud in one state, that can be investigated by a recount in that one state. But if we would have to have a national recount, there are no barriers to having every state vote contested in courts forever, really, and the system would not be sustained. So the founders have built a sturdy vessel that can withstand almost all the pitfalls and storms, but the Electoral College has made us with a very stable system. Mrs. Merkel, who's the Chancellor of Germany, is a minority. She's in a coalition government, and she was never elected by all the German people. Boris Johnson, until he had a recent election, he and Mrs. May before were both minority presidents in negotiated coalitions inside their parliament. So instability in Israel today shows us that the republics can fall apart. In practical terms, contact your state senator, even if you think they're friendly and they're going to vote against this, contact your, no matter what party, and say, I believe in the Electoral College system. The voters should speak and be respected in this state. Do not be for the national popular vote.
All right, so another question, and this is actually, this is one that I have, and this is one that another participant on the webinar has. Could this NPV end up heading to the Supreme Court to determine if the compact is legitimate, or and if so, must Congress approve this particular compact in order for it to be legitimate?
Yes, excellent question. Constitutional experts tell me that until they have the 270 electoral votes, there is no case in controversy. In other words, until the compact actually goes into effect, there's no one to be sued because it's not active. And so, as Hemingway once wrote, first I had some debt, and then suddenly I was bankrupt. And so we'll go along watching this, and all of a sudden we'll fall off the cliff. We'll have a constitutional crisis. Now, will the Congress vote to okay this compact? Well, that's up to the voters this November, because if the House and Senate and White House all become, let's say, the Democratic Party, the Congress could then approve of this compact, and therefore the constitutional issue might be removed in terms of the question here. So if we have a single party system in Washington, the checks and balances are gone, they could actually improve this compact. And if so, then that's a green light from the federal government to go ahead with, in effect, amending the Constitution without a vote of the states. Then the justices would have to decide if, in effect, the Congress itself had acted unconstitutionally by negating the need for the Constitution to be amended by a vote of the 38 legislatures, and that would be the issue. So we have two constitutional issues that could be before the court. The second is the most drastic. Let's hope that we continue to have divided governments so we don't have a constitutional crisis.
You know, I think it's really important that our representatives take away some really good lessons from this. You know, but what can we be able to do? You mentioned calling our legislators. What specifically would you say that we need to convey to them during this time, especially as we're running up on this potential committee meeting coming up in the fall, to convince them this is not good for Virginia, this is not good for the voters of Virginia?
Well, as I mentioned, this is an effort by a single party in the legislature to pass a law and ask a governor of their party to sign a law that says no matter how the people of Virginia vote, no matter how they vote, we want to go with, in effect, how New York and California are voting, because that's where so many, I showed you, there's more people in New York City than Virginia, by a few 100,000. So, you know, be true to our Commonwealth, be true to the voters that you represent, to represent them by not representing them. This is such an ironic vote for them to say, I'm their elected representative, and one of the things I want to do is pass a law that says they will not be represented in the presidential election. We will have the majority vote of the total country be our guide in how our electors will vote, not the people, not the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're a nation of states. We would never be, we would never have a constitution be a nation at all if the states thought that they would be negated as entities in our polity.
We might have time here for one final question, and you mentioned the challenges of fraudulent or erroneous outcomes that we would have to apply or acknowledge. The fact that some states, especially those flyover states, their voices are not going to be heard. Can you speak to the partisanship? We're in a very hyper-partisan climate right now. Yeah. And what impact is this going to have on partisanship with respect to our electoral process and our political process?
Right. We are probably, since the Civil War, we're more divided than we have been since that era. And that's a complicated story of why that we're not dealing with today. But boy, right now we have gridlock in Washington most of the time. And matter of fact, the U.S. House has become not a legislative body so much as a investigator of the executive branch, if you will, rather than a legislative body. And the courts have become legislatures because that's where so many decisions have been taken. If you think we're divided now, wait until 9 of the states that have most of the votes, 51%, Wait until they decide every presidential election. And you have entire states that feel we will never be heard from again. That's unravels the unity of this country in a way, and undermines through an end run of the Constitution. And once the Constitution is gone, we don't have a country. We really just have majority rule, which always turns into, as Plato says, a tyranny of sorts. And we had a woman in Dallas yesterday that was put in jail for a week and fined $7,000 because she tried to cut her customer's hair. And there was no law passed by a legislative body. It was decreed by one person. And we have 1,000 stories now around the country of such things. So if you want to have a sense of what tyranny is like, is the founders would say, where are her rights? What legislative body that she voted for, the city council that she voted for, did they rule on that, or was that a judge and a mayor? So tyranny is always, as Ronald Reagan said in his farewell address, losing our freedom is just one election away in this country, always has been. And we have to engage the state legislature, and especially the state Senate, and tell them that we want to have a nation of states, and please respect the voters, the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia. This would be the best thing you can do to reduce the division in our country.
I think that those that are on the webinar, we'll just kind of wrap up here, would probably love to know where they can go to find out some more information. Maybe you could share maybe a couple, maybe your website, if there's any other places that you would recommend, and anybody who's maybe an expert in this area, along with you and your colleagues, of who they can seek for good information on this timely topic.
Very good. So saveourstates.com has resources, books, essays, testimony, etc. It also, we're listing scholars and policy experts. On our policy council, we have a speakers bureau. There's also an organization I started that has a website called the Center for the Electoral College.us, which also has those people, those speakers, those materials. So those two websites have an awful lot of information. If anyone has a need for a speaker, once people start meeting again, or they want to do webinars, we have speakers in 22 states already identified. So if you want, we have lots of speakers here in Virginia. I think we list a dozen or so. Happy to have people come and speak in your communities in Virginia about this issue, do a webinar like this. And again, saveourstates.com. You can contact us, you can contact myself, and we can arrange for a speaker. We can get you materials, answer your questions.
Great. So one final question. I know that said that was the final question. And you've listed a number of states that y'all are tracking on this particular issue on the compact. Where are y'all headed to next? Can you tell us where your focus is in addition to Virginia? Where should we be concerned if we're looking at other states who might be considering this MPV?
So Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania. I think those are the states most at risk here. But Virginia is number one for us. Obviously, we live here, and we haven't had a southern state vote for this. And Virginia would be the first if we do that. So we want to make sure we have the message here in Virginia be successful. And if we win, it'll be only the second state that's turned back this in an all one-party state. Finally, this November, there's a referendum in Colorado. The Colorado state government did pass NPV, but the voters rebelled, and Fortunately, they have initiative referendum in their constitution. And so on November 3rd, the voters of Colorado have the choice of negating the national popular vote legislation. And there's a group that I'm trying to remember the name right now, the Colorado group, something like Colorado First, but I think that's it. But you can find it, and a contribution to that campaign. By the way, 98% of the money on the other side in that referendum is coming from California and New York. This is really a California, New York takeover of the presidential election. Those are the population sources. Those were all the money is coming from for these campaigns. And we can see it in Colorado, and almost 100% of the money is coming from New York and Colorado, from California in a Colorado referendum. So this is really Los Angeles and New York trying to take over our presidency. And that should not happen in our democratic republic.
Yeah. Well, I know that many of our followers, when they read some of our email alerts and pieces on our blog, they recognize how much influence California and New York are having on Virginia's policies with respect to abortions,
Right.
religious freedom. So we can now add the National Popular Vote Compact is another policy that they're trying to push on Virginians. And so hopefully many people will stand up and oppose and write their legislator and communicate with them that they want their votes heard and respected. For those that are on the webinar, I just want to let them know that we've added in the chat your website where they can go to Save Our States to get all of that information. We put it in there for their convenience. And with that, that would conclude our time together. Michael, we really do appreciate it. You're a wealth of information. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign off, and Victoria is going to come on and close us out.
Okay, thank you very much, Todd and Victoria.
It was a pleasure to have you. And I tell people I try to surround myself with the smartest people in the room. Clearly, this is one of them. So I try to get Michael involved with whatever we can. He's a wealth of information, not just on this topic, but also on a number of other conservative things that Family Foundation cares about and that we're working on as a conservative movement. I really appreciate the fact that he understands and really outlined well for us the threat of this issue and the way it really will unravel our entire Constitution if we can't elect a form of government the way we were designed to do so. And really what's interesting about that is that he really highlighted, you know, we're a nation of states. And I would say in this moment, in the pandemic, we're seeing that we're a nation of states more than ever before, where every state is doing something different. And I think people are starting to realize, wow, there can be extreme differences between my state, whether it's red, blue, or purple, and the state next to mine. And that's the kind of stuff that matters when we think about electing a president. And hopefully people are kind of getting a better sense of that in this moment. The other thing I want to mention, I really appreciate that he outlined the threat that this is of passing, and he really mentioned two key takeaways. The first one was that ultimately, in theory, compacts have to be approved by Congress, and we have those elections this fall. Family Foundation Action is working overtime, particularly in the 7th Congressional District of Virginia, because we know that Congresswoman Spanberger is unlikely to be on our side on many, has not been on Life and Equality Act and many other things, but unlikely on this issue as well. So if you're interested in that, get involved with Family Foundation Action. And then he mentioned our state Senate committee is going to look at this in the fall. So we should all be talking to our state representatives. Now we've gotten equipped. That's the point of these calls, is to equip ourselves with some good arguments. There's more on these websites. And so we can write these letters to the editor. We can have these emails sent to our delegate or our senator. So Family Foundation is happy to help you with any of that, but hopefully this was a good tool to kind of do that. I sort of see some parallels with this issue and the ERA, actually, this idea that we would do something that you know, would end up in court as not really even being valid. And so we'll see what happens with that. But it's a deeply disturbing thing when the left tries to tackle undoing the whole system so they can get the rest of their agenda through. I am excited now at this point as we close up to tell you about next week. Folks have been asking every single chat We have had questions about elections. What did the General Assembly do this past session to change election law? What's going on in this pandemic with nomination contests? And what is this thing we're hearing in the news about we don't even have to have a witness for a write-in ballot? And so I was racking my brain to think, who do we want to talk to about that? And honestly, neither party seems to really have their act together. When you talk to various people, it's like, well, we might do this, we might do that. The candidates can't agree. It's kind of a mess. But I thought, why go partisan politics? Let's go straight to the source. And I have a friend that is the commissioner in the commissioner for the Department of Elections for Virginia. And so next week, I'm super excited to bring on Chris Piper. He's not a partisan. He is just the electoral commissioner. And so this is going to give us a chance to hear from him. Kind of what did the General Assembly do? How does that change? I'd like to hear from him a little bit about what opportunities for fraud are there, or how we're going to protect against fraud. As you know, we changed driver's license this year. There's a lot of stuff that I think has true impact, what we're allowing with regards to identification regarding folks that are immigrants and illegal immigrants even. And so we're just looking at those issues, just to hopefully get some insight from him. And then hopefully he might have some thoughts of what he's hearing is going to happen with results of all of these deadlines being moved around during the pandemic. So you do not want to miss next week with Chris Piper. We'll be sending that registration out again, likely first thing Monday morning, but plan to be back here at noon next Thursday. Thanks so much and have a great week.